People who have straight up rage quit a job. What was the final straw? Many years ago, while working in a manufacturing facility, my boss came into work already pissed off because his wife served him divorce papers. Saying good morning was apparently enough to set him off, and he picked up a wrench from the table and threw it at my head. I ducked. It missed. Then I just closed my toolbox and wheeled it to the truck. Story 2. Not me, but a colleague once wrote a long stinker of an email, hit send at 10:30 a.m., and exited the building immediately. He blind copied all receivers, but sent it to multiple departments of a large multinational I was working at. No one knew who didn't get the email, except for the gasps around the office. He was completely disgruntled and went in on multiple managers, supervisors, and various colleagues with absolute venom. It was amazing. Still the best work email I've ever received, and some crap he called out actually had to be addressed by management. It brought about a lot of positive change. Story 3. This was 20 years ago. My fiancée had been hospitalized for 16 months after a car accident. When she passed away, my boss would not let me have time off for bereavement because we were not legally married. Story 4? I never have. But my favorite example was when a coworker in student transportation, who had finally gotten a position she wanted after years of suffering through stress in another, was called by management over the summer and told she was being reassigned to the stressful position because no one else wanted to do it. She had fought too long and hard to get what she wanted, and her immediate response was, "Then tell me what I need to do to resign." She did, and she's been at peace with her decision ever since. Story 5. I was waiting tables while I was in grad school. I'd requested a weekend off far in advance, right after I got my syllabus, because there was a seminar pertinent to a class. Our professor expected us to go and write a paper. It was a decent chunk of our grade. The weekend comes up, and lo and behold, I'm scheduled doubles Friday through Sunday. I hunt down the manger and say I can't do that, and I've given months' notice. She pulls the requests are just requests, not guarantees. And I tell her point blank, I will fail this class if I don't go. She shrugged. She said, that isn't my problem. I told her is now, and left. Like damn, I was going fail a class for my master's degree, waiting tables at a damn rainforest cafe. Story 6. At one office job, I quit after the first day because the lady training me would ignore me when our manager wasn't around, and I caught her snooping through my purse when I went to the bathroom. At another job at a clinic, I quit after a month because they made me do a solo receptionist shift without training me on what I needed to do to open the clinic, and then I got yelled at for not knowing what to do in front of patients. It was so bad, some of the patients came up to me after and asked if I was okay. Story 7. I was flat out lied to about the position. It was a management position at a residential mental health facility, and I had taken it, leaving a great paying but stressful position, because it wouldn't require travel and was supposed to be much more laid back. On top of many other issues, I ended up having to work 8 weeks straight without a single day off, even weekends and one holiday. So after a very heated meeting with upper management where one person was flat out lying to cover their own butt, I sent a resignation email from the parking lot. Story 8. A girl was real sick with lupus, needed an ambulance, she was having massive seizures. Manager said, sorry you can't use these lines to dial out. No, you may not use my phone. I rage quit that day. Story 9. I was working when I got the call that my partner of 7 years had been in a terrible car accident while visiting family in Florida. He was in the hospital and his mother called me to tell me he wasn't awake yet. I was obviously devastated and scared out of my mind. Told my coworkers and boss because it was obvious I was panicking, and they told me to take the rest of the weekend off so I could deal with things and prepare and clean his apartment for if he got back. Specifically, they said to come back Monday, and it was a Friday. Next day, I was cleaning up his apartment when I got the call from my boss, screaming about why I hadn't come into work that day. I told him that I recalled him telling me to take the weekend off and come back Monday. He said to come to work immediately because they needed me. Against my better judgment and my emotional state, I showed up and clocked in. Boss came up to me, threw the stack of checks down on the counter that had just come in, and told me, if you do that again, you're fired. This was someone who had never yelled at me before, or even dared speak to me in any stern way. Prior to my arrival, their store was an absolute mess, and I spent all of my free time, what little there was, reorganizing and cleaning and setting up new systems. For some reason, the fact he chose to start speaking to me this way and demanding my attention now, at that time, it just made me snap. A chord was struck, and it resonated, strong. I got the message clearly. He was one of those bosses who became controlling of anyone who became of value to him and his business. The moment you aren't available when they need, or even wanted you to be, they were going to make you feel bad about it, so you were afraid to ask for more personal time or any other leniencies that took you away from work. I was literally reeling, saw red. The moment he turned his back, I snatched my check, walked out with a full line of customers at the counter and the phone going off with incoming orders, and drove off. He blew up my phone all day, never came back or called back. Fortunately, he made it home safe and healed up fine. Unfortunately, he passed away on our anniversary a few years later. I regret every moment I passed up to spend time with him over that job, or any job for that matter. I know barely anyone is going to read this now that it's buried under a pile of other comments, but it still felt nice to type it out. Story 10. One very busy night while waitressing. I was standing at a table of 12 in the middle of taking their order when another waitress came up to me and said our boss wanted us in their office that instant. So I leave my full section in the middle of chaos to go see what the problem is. My boss began to chew us both out because the other girl asked if I would switch shifts with her and I had agreed. I didn't say anything but was obviously annoyed because I had just left all my tables thinking there was some sort of emergency. My boss looked at me and asked why I looked mad, and I told him, I feel like this could have been sorted out without me. If you didn't want her to leave early, you could have just told her no instead of pulling me away from our customers. They said, if you're going to have an attitude, get your crap and leave. I said okay and went to transfer my tables. I was over it. I had worked there 3 years, and the owners were alcoholics that treated us like garbage and spent all the company on themselves instead of getting ingredients to make food or paying their employees. The other waitress came back out and said our boss wanted me back in the office. I went in and they said, put your apron back on, you're not fired. I said, you're both damn crazy if you think you can treat people the way you do and expect them to want to work for you. And I walked out. As I was leaving, they came out behind me saying I would regret it and was never allowed back if I left. I threw up my middle fingers and kept walking. Funny part is, I let my boyfriend take my car to work that night, so I had to walk a mile home and break into my house. Story 11. I worked for a call center. I refused to try and sell a DirecTV package to a woman who was literally bawling her eyes out on the phone because she was having to switch her phone plan to her name instead of her husband's name because he had just died. Story 12. Godfather's Pizza. The manager wouldn't give me my paycheck at 8 p.m. on Sunday because the money might not be in the account yet, but I could pick it up at 9 a.m. Monday. This was decades ago, before direct and mobile deposits. The bank wouldn't be open until the next day anyway. All of the paychecks were literally in his hand at that moment. There were lots of issues before that, but that was the final sign that the manager was completely uninterested in reason. In the next few weeks, nearly everyone else quit. Then the manager was finally fired. Story 13. Was having a meeting with the boss, who was a difficult guy to work with, and he stood up and punched the wall. He wasn't doing it jokingly. He bare-knuckled went at the wall of his own office, like he was in the gym hitting a punching bag. I sat there in astonishment for about 2 seconds, then stood up and left, cleared out my desk, exited through the back door without a word to anyone. There's no place for that conduct in the professional world, even if the guy does own the company. Story 14. My boss cursed me because I took a phone message for him because he was already on a call. Apparently, he was eagerly awaiting the call I answered and would have preferred I interrupted him. I threw a pencil at the wall, said, "Do I look like a mind reader? Cut me my check." I quit. He tried hard to backpedal, but there had been many previous straws. Story 15. I was vomiting in the parking lot every day before walking into my job from stress. Then one day, I was kicked in the teeth, literally, by one of the clients, and my boss would not let me leave to go to the dentist. I went anyway, was docked pay for my time at the emergency appointment, and then they begged me not to sue. I quit. Story 16. Worked my ass off, graduated, and the boss said, "Yeah, we're going to move you to customer service." Sound good? Stayed late that night drafting a company-wide "duck you" email. Probably shouldn't have done that in hindsight, but some bridges just begged to be burned. Story 17. Had a sweet schedule working security in a Class A office building. 3 swings, 2 p.m. to 10 p.m., and 2 graves, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. per week. My weekend was Friday and Saturday. The graves were actually really chill, easy to deal with. I liked them, but only 2 of them. Then we get a new security company. All the supervisors are fired, and new ones from the new company are brought in. Suddenly, I'm working 5 graves. I ask for a change to swing. No dice. They offer to move me to a different site. It's 5 graves again. I find out my old supervisor is now working as security manager at a local mall. I give him a call, and he offers me a job. I took it, grabbed my uniform from the old company, drove to the office, walked it, dropped my uniform on the director's desk, turned and walked out, went down to the mall and picked up my new uniform. Story 18. I was a supervisor of housekeeping at a hotel. Every holiday, all of management would take off, leaving me the highest in charge. I asked for a raise after working a full year of holidays as the only management and was denied the next year on the biggest party day in the city. I set all my employees up with their work and texted the managers a picture of me at the bar partying, telling them the hotel might be on fire. I don't know, I quit. Story 19. I was working as the kitchen ducker at 24 Hours a Day Greek restaurant, hired as dishwasher, also doing cold prep and maintenance. I was the guy peeling 50-feet bags of onions, carrots, potatoes, as well as making dry ribs, pizza, salad. I had booked off 3 days over a weekend. Got called on day 2 at 7 a.m. telling me I was late. Got there and was told I was on the 11 a.m. start. Then it got changed to 4 p.m. when I went in again. then got changed to 11 p.m. when I went in for 4 p.m. And when I went in for 11 p.m., it was changed again to actually have me off for the 3 days. 4 schedule changes in 24 HRS. Laws here say 1 week minimum notice. That owner would change the schedule after you clocked out to say you worked shorter hours on a regular basis, and you pretty much had to check at 7 a.m. to see if you were on for the day. I had my choice words. Told them I'd be back in 2 weeks for my paycheck. Story 20. Mine? I was tired of doing a 3-person job. My boss following me around, calling me at home during meetings when I was sick, talking to me outside the bathroom door was making me crazy. I came back from vacation one day to find piles and piles of work that other people could have done. I quit, packed my crap, and left. Story 21. He wouldn't train me properly, then come yell at me in front on the office. He would always threaten my job, or like hiring someone else, and I finally said, good. I hope you find someone better because I quit and will be leaving once other lady comes back from lunch. He tried to backpedal and ask if I was serious. I never looked back. He hired me without any experience because he knew he could lowball me. I got paid pennies for what someone with experience would get paid. Story 22. My manager's boss did a surprise inspection, and my boss wrote me up for doing my job the exact way he trained me. Apparently, when he trained me, he was cutting corners. Story 23. The owner of the company told me to fire a woman for arriving to work right on time. It was always something different with him. Some ridiculous new rule that he applied retroactively to suit whatever mood he was in on any given day. And that particular morning, he took it as a personal insult and a show of blatant disrespect that his employees didn't arrive early. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't fire this woman, who I didn't even particularly like, to satisfy this new whim of his. So instead of firing her, I marched into his office and quit myself. Funnily enough, the woman I wouldn't fire continued working for him for years. She might even still be there now, 20-some years later. Story 24. Worked at an upscale busy bar a couple years back, right after pandemic. We were constantly understaffed, overworked, and treated like crap from management and customers. One Friday night, my manager let the other bartender go early because he had a crush on her and wanted in her pants. I got overwhelmed by a rush, and he started getting at me about not being able to handle the bar. I looked at him in the eye, about to really rage, and without a word walked to the back into the liquor room, grabbed 2 bottles of Jameson, put them in my backpack, and walked out the front door. My manager's fearful, confused face while asking, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" was absolutely priceless. Best decision I made, and I'm not joking. Story 25. Working as a mortuary transporter for a family-owned crematory. Boss was kind of a git, and her husband was an idiot. Constant on-call overnight shifts. But honestly, I really enjoyed the work, so I put up with it. The problem was that my boss refused to do direct deposit. This was 2 years ago, so it's not like Dee Dee was unheard of, and she'd hand us out checks on Monday. I'd been on call the weekend prior to payday, and it was really busy, particularly Sunday night. I was out from like 8 p.m. until 6 a.m. I'm working, so on Monday I called out because I didn't want to drive a full shift on 0 hours of sleep. Well, in my constant sleep deprivation, I'd forgotten I was supposed to get paid. That Friday, I was talking to a coworker on our way to a pickup and mentioned how I couldn't wait to get paid next week, and he gave me this look and told me we got paid on Monday and asked if I'd never gotten my check. So at the end of the day, I went to my boss and asked, and she just laughed and joked that she'd wondered when I would ask for it and had hoped I'd just forgotten. So her playing cute with my checks was the beginning of the end. Then next payday, she sat us all down and explained that from here on out, drivers were not allowed to call out simply because they'd worked all night before. By this point, she'd driven off all the other transporters and was down to me and one other dude full-time, with another transporter coming in 2 days a week, and her business couldn't function if either of us called out. So I got my check from her, and then at the end of the day, I ended up working till 10 p.m. that night. I left her a note saying I quit effective immediately and to mail me my last check. A few months later, the other driver texted me and told me that she'd never replaced me, and that he'd quit and got hired at another funeral home and convinced the part-time driver to go with him. I just checked the website, and apparently they're still open. I like how they managed with nobody to get the corpses. Story 26. I was a receptionist for a medical software company. Boss refused my request for a single day off to take my teen daughter to surgery. I waited until the first day of her 2-week vacation and put in my notice. Ruined her holiday. Story 27. I had a boss at a dog daycare who was a pure sociopath. She deliberately tried to set her employees against each other with gossip and listened to our conversations on the remote cameras and used what we said against each other. It gets worse, but she heard me talking to another employee about finding another job, then confronted me and told me she would just take all my hours away if I was going to quit. Then she heard me tell another employee I contacted the Department of Labor to find out if that was legal. It is. And ambushed me after lunch to fire me in front of other employees. So I heard you called the Labor Department about your hours. And at this point, I realized this is the only chance I'm going to get to just unload on this git, and I'm taking it. Went off. Okay, first of all, you insane Brazilian ducker, who the damn do you think you are? I unleashed the beast for 10 straight minutes right in her damn face. I told her about when we lied to her face about throwing away shock collars she used on the customers' dogs without their knowledge or consent, how she's a miserable and ugly human being. The employees hate her. We all dread her coming in because she ducks everything up, how she was damn stupid. Her husband is a pedo and probably an abuser, raked her over the coals about the time she forgot a customer's dog in the car for 3 hours in May, and then lied to the customer about it. I remember one point I yelled, "Didn't you ever ducking wonder why everyone who quits this damn crap hole has nothing good to say about working here? It's you! You're a miserable ducker." And eventually I gave her the finger, said, "Damn this, and duck you, I'm out." I talked to one of the employees who witnessed the entire thing later, and he said, "Well, you made a lot of good points." Story 28. Well, I'm genuinely about to write now after my manager told me our dishwasher is broken and won't get fixed until at least Thursday, and I have to pull solo shifts next week because we're seriously understaffed after 2 people were let go in January, despite me telling management repeatedly that we actually need more people to account for all the vacation days and sick leaves happening right now. Apparently restarting fixed the broken dishwasher. So that's at least one problem off my back. Story 29. Worked in retail. Sprained my ankle really bad while ice skating. Couldn't so much as get out of bed. Had to call in and take 2 days off before I was even able to limp to work. Soon as I got back in, manager pulled me into his office to scream at me for taking 2 days off. For a physical injury that physically made it so I could not do my job, threw a cold cup of coffee on him and walked out. My only regret is that the coffee was cold. Story 30. My manager started snapping her fingers in my face 3 inches away from my eyes, saying in a slow said, "You're doing it wrong. Hello, that's not how I told you to do it." When I was folding the shirts somewhat slower and less optimally than I was shown, though achieving the same fold. Also, it was my 3rd week and one of 20 folds I had to learn on that job. I walked right then and there. Story 31. When I was 20 years old, I worked a commission-based sales job. The manager hated me for some reason. I genuinely, to this day, have no idea why. I tried really hard, had a good attitude, and followed all the rules. My sales weren't extraordinary, but I always met my numbers. My grandmother died about 6 months into the job. I texted my manager to tell him I'd be taking my 3 days of bereavement, as allowed by the union. I even apologized for the inconvenience as though I could control my grandmother's death. He called me the day after she died, accusing me of lying, saying I was lazy and just wanted the time off. Keep in mind, I'd never called out before or even been more than 5 minutes late to a shift. I sent him medical documentation proving she'd had a stroke during the night and passed away. He called me back and said fine, I could have that day off, but he better see me the next day, my 3rd day of union-protected bereavement, or I'd be fired. Stricken with grief, but terrified of losing my job, I drove the 2 hours back to my apartment from the grandmother's house that night. The next morning, I went into work tired and melancholy. He gitted at me to smile because no one wants to buy cell phones from a sad girl. I plastered on a smile and hit the sales floor. At lunchtime, I cried my eyes out in my car, reapplied my makeup, went back to work with my fake smile. I was in the middle of helping a customer when he comes bouldering up to the table and starts asking the customer all the same questions I had to see what products they'd be eligible for. The customer was baffled and told him I'd already covered everything and that no further help was necessary. He went on a rant about what a terrible, useless employee I was. I looked at the customer and deadpan said, "I'm so sorry to leave you with him, but as of this moment, I quit." The manager followed me to the break room, shouting and raving while I gathered my purse, turned in my equipment, and clocked out. He followed me to my car, still berating me. Finally, that same customer I walked away from came out and physically stood between me and the manager so I could get in my car and drive away. The manager proceeded to call me every day for a week and leave abusive voicemails about me missing shifts because he didn't accept my resignation. He even called me the day of my grandmother's funeral and said now that she'd been cremated, I had no excuse not to come back to work. Damn that douche, Jeremy. I hope he eventually got a taste of his own medicine. Story 32. When he wouldn't let me take a few weeks off to recover from a broken humerus. He was afraid he'd lose money if my department, I was the only one in that department, outsourced my work for those few weeks. So I quit and shut his entire department down. Story 33. Worked at a Korean BBQ restaurant. They said since I was unexperienced, they will cut my wages. Hired me as a server and made me clean toilets and grills all day. 12-hour shift, gave me $9 in cash. Quit on the spot. Story 34. I was a community engagement officer, which basically means I took a disabled adult out in the community to achieve certain goals, grocery shopping, some basic concept of money, and rudimentary budgeting. He was fine. His mom was a pill, the sort of pill that has been abusing underpaid staff at underfunded social services for entire decades, to the point her grip on what the world owed her, for free, was heavily screwed. Also, all she ever did for herself was sit on her bum in front of Netflix all day. She would call, almost always after I had wrapped up for the day and was driving him home, to demand that I stop at a convenience store for cigarettes, booze, or a specific fast food joint on the other side of town because I am apparently a free personal courier. My favorite moment was when she actually had me pick up cigarettes and drop them off at her cousin's, because why not get the whole family in on abusing impoverished public servants? I tried to set simple boundaries with her. You can ask me when I am leaving for X, Y, and X, and she would just show her ass so much. Oh, I don't know when I'll be needing cigarettes. I just call when I do. Oh, I can't afford Instacart or Uber, even though my kid and I easily eat $1,000 in fast food a month. My car is $500 a month, and we haven't even started talking about booze and cigs. No, paying people for their labor is where I need to cut my corners, so I cut her off. She continues to pretend she doesn't understand that she is cut off, like a 5-year-old. Anyway, she demands that I go to a convenience store and get her cigarettes. I say no. And then this git sits on her fat ass, yards away from a $500 a month car, and proceeds to text her kid to harass me for what she thought she was owed. It occurred to me that no $10 per hour gig was worth it. So I dropped him off at her place and told her I was glad she was going to be twitching and sweating all night. I'm still owed money from that job that I will likely never see. Story 35. The company told me I was to enforce 2 new policies. 1. All employees must report to work 15 minutes early for their shift. However, they would not be paid for that time. 2. All employees must take their unpaid lunch break in specific areas, under very specific circumstances. I told them we needed to have a meeting to discuss the legality of their new policies before I could enforce them on my team. They replied, "Either you enforce the policies or you resign your position." I said, "See ya." They begged me to reconsider and to not make a bad decision just because I was upset. Unfortunately, I was already out the door. Story 36. Wanted to take long service leave holidays, but got denied because we're too busy right now. A few months later, wanted to take long service leave holidays, but got denied because we're too busy right now. A few months later, wanted to take long service leave holidays, but got denied because we're too busy right now. I replied to that email with my resignation, handed in my pass to security, and walked out the door. Story 37. He gave me literally 72 hours worth of work and insisted it be completed in 36 hours. When I pointed the inconsistency out, he said, "Do what you can." And when I submitted it, he called me from vacation to scream at me about mistakes. I deleted everything, walked away, blocked him on everything. 72 business hours and 36 calendar hours. Story 38. I was exhausted, had been working 50-hour weeks, and couldn't wait until Christmas break. I was the only person out of 25 required to work Saturday mornings on a 6-week fundraiser in addition to my regular hours. Others were only scheduled once. I was scheduled all 6 Saturdays. Finally, a foreign colleague wanted to work Christmas, so she could go to her home country early in the next year. The entire office was supposed to be closed for those 2 weeks. The boss picked me to be with her and refused to let me say no. I didn't want to take a break later when the rest of my family would have been off over Christmas. And I couldn't bear to have waited another 2 weeks as I was barely hanging on right then. She wouldn't let it go, so I quit. The boss decided to work with her herself. That was fine with me. The mystery is why it had to be me or her out of 25 coworkers. Well, not my problem. Story 39. I was working fast food and had been promised training for promotions a few times that never happened, but were happening to others hired when I was. But I still was working well. Then the company brought in a person with no experience in anything related to food service, hospitality, or even retail, and instantly made her a manager in training. And I got to teach this person how to do other things in the restaurant, despite they were being paid almost double what I was. I still was doing my job, but the second time she was allowed to manage the restaurant was during a lunch hour. Our restaurant was across from a high school, and we got 3 quick bursts from them, and we knew exactly what times they would happen. It was 20 years ago, and I can still remember the times 10:45 a.m., 11:30 a.m., and 2:05 p.m. because that's when school got out. I was only working a short shift that day and was due a 10-minute break before 2:30 p.m. I asked her to take it around 1 p.m. because I wasn't able to go home after that shift and was going to need to eat. Of course, she says no because that's during the middle of lunch. However, there wasn't a line, and I had the screens cleared. I was the only person due a break soon. I figured it would be perfect, but was told to wait. And at 2:08 was sent on break, with a line to the door, and it took me an extra 3 minutes to get back from break because of how long I waited to be able to get food. When I come back, I just wash my hands and get working on clearing the backlog of orders that piled up during the most predictable rush we get every day. And she wants to talk about how long I took on break. I ask if this can wait until after the rush because I need to concentrate when spinning shakes or the blender could hurt someone. And she says, "No, we need to talk about this right now." I immediately snapped and went inside. "What the heck It's my fault you send me on break and we are now backed up and you think my extra 3 minutes chewing my lunch is the reason. I actually just turned around, walked away from her to go talk to the store GM who was supervising and asked if we could talk for 5 seconds. She said the trainer was in charge. So, no, and I said, that's Finn. I'm just going to quit then. I was close enough to the time clock. I didn't even have to take a step to type my number and said I'd bring my uniform back next week after I wash it and walked out mid-rush. Didn't regret it. And I went back and ate there later. None of my coworkers ever held a grudge, nor did the managers. I found out a few weeks later she basically had a meltdown and quit because she couldn't handle the pressure and pace of being an assistant manager at a chain fast food store.
Story 40.
I was told I wasn't working hard enough after months of 70-hour weeks being salaried doing multiple people's jobs. I had asked multiple times to hire someone else. I knew we had the budget on the job. I agreed to work harder and called mom to vent because I was so angry. During the call, she texted my then boyfriend, now husband, to go to me because she genuinely thought I was going to hit myself. I'll admit I was hysterical, so I get why she was worried. When he told me that I called my boss back and quit with no notice. What was even more ducked up is a few days later, I was asked to call my former boss to calm her down and say it wasn't her fault. I didn't, but I did calmly explain how she burned me out and multiple people needed to be hired to cover the workload I was doing. Otherwise, the same thing would happen again. Story 41. I'm a physician who does procedures. This business was composed of several outpatient offices. Specifically, we did a high volume of peripheral arterial interventions and dialysis access maintenance. We also performed vascular ultrasounds. In the first month, I watched my colleague sign off on numerous ultrasounds that he had not interpreted, only a preliminary from sonographer. All these were billed for physician interpretation, which is fraud. After that, I started to realize that a large number of our procedures were not indicated. Patient data such as tests, symptoms, labs, etc. were fabricated and modified to trigger us to say yes to cases. I started noticing a lot of normal angiograms, which didn't make sense. Then, they pushed us to always perform an intervention, usually atherectomy, because that's the highest reimbursement, around $20,000. There was inadequate equipment and only one nurse for every procedure, who was also the office manager, billing department, receptionist. The ultrasound unit was damaged and images subdiagnostic at best. Ultrasound and angiogram images were often deleted, tampered with, or swapped between patients, so if there was ever an audit, the fraud wouldn't stand out. Oh, and the angiographic equipment, x-ray, table, etc., hadn't been inspected or certified for years. I voiced my concerns. Nothing was done. The company existed solely to generate profit, with no regard for patients. I witnessed complications from procedures that didn't even happen in the first place. After enough of this, I went to work and suddenly quit at about 2 p.m. The company was also already under a corporate integrity agreement. The appropriate regulatory agencies were notified. There's still business as of today, but it won't be for long. Story 42. I tried putting my 2 weeks in, but every leadership individual was either gone on a business trip, vacation, or not my direct report. I gave my 2 weeks to a non-direct report manager, my manager's sister. I also sent him an email. That was exactly 2 weeks. My direct report manager comes in 2 days later and sees my email. He got angry because I was unethical and I didn't give a proper 2-week notice when I told him my last day was 12 days away. Because 2 days ago, I tried reaching him and told his sister. He got angry and basically whatevered me. The end of that week, I still had a week left. We got our paychecks. Since 2 weeks before that was a federal holiday, the shop was shut down and nobody could work because, holiday. Guess who didn't get paid for their holiday? Who has 2 thumbs and also had 50% of their paycheck that pay cycle? This guy. I went to his office and said there must be a mistake and said there wasn't. I asked him to elaborate and his words were, "It wasn't fair you didn't give us the proper heads up, so I thought it would only be fair to do the same to you." I nodded and smiled and said, "All right, bud." Went back to my office, ducked up their ramshackle in-house made database because ducked them, deleted entries and crap, called OSHA on multiple violations, and walked out the back door. But only after I dumped my container egg salad inside his lunchbox and put his lunchbox in the UN air-conditioned shop during 98 degrees temperatures in shop. Damn you, Burns. Story 43. This just happened last week. I was driving a shuttle bus for a retirement community, and the maintenance department manager accused me of drinking on the job. It was an absolutely out-of-pocket accusation without a shred of proof other than his claim of smelling it on me. There are hand sanitizer stations next to every damn time clock, and I use them. I said, "I'll take a damn breathalyzer test right now. Let's go." And he balked. Pretended like he didn't just damn accuse me of putting the residents' lives at risk and then expected me to finish my shift. I noped the duck out of there and went straight to calling out sick for the next week until they fired me for no call, no showing for an entire week. Check your damn voicemails. Damn that damn place with a soiled catheter. Story 44. I was sweating my tits off at a convenience store in the back room washing dishes or some damn thing and this lady I worked with came in, saw me sweating to death, and then went back out and told people I was washing my hair in the sink with the dishes. I said, damn it, this place sucks, and I just never went back. I went back to work at McDonald's after that. Story 45. I was at work. This was a decade ago. Small family-owned business. There were only 8 of us employees, with a manager and a receptionist at work. The owner inherited the company and lived in Washington State, while we were about 30 miles away from Bowling Green, Kentucky. It was a morning, around 10:30, and I wasn't due for lunch for another half hour. But my brother had called 3 times back-to-back. My sister called twice back-to-back. Then my husband started calling, so I knew it wasn't good. I stepped out the back door and called my husband back, and he proceeded to tell me that my dad had passed away overnight, and my sister found him because they were going to go to lunch that morning. I lost it, started blubbering like a baby. I immediately called the owner, told him what was going on. He told me he'd take care of work just to go on home, and he was sorry for my loss. The manager proceeds to butt right in the situation while I was on the phone with the boss, telling me, "I'm writing you up. You can't just walk away from your work, etc." We were a small custom metal fab shop. My mom had already passed away 15 years before this day, and Dad just died less than 6 hours before this. Keep that in mind. She is running her mouth the whole way back in the building and yipping like a chihuahua. I made it back to the water jet and was grabbing my stuff when she made the remark, "I don't know who raised you, but they failed. You parents did a piss-poor job at teaching you a work ethic and being responsible. All you kids are the same these days, lazy and irresponsible. Who's your mom so I can go tell her she's a bad mother?" I spun around so fast she took a step back. Bobby, one of my Fav co-workers and still a good family friend. Him and the husband go duck hunting together, proceeded to grab me so I didn't hit her. I then told her in my most quiet, calm, and low voice that I refused to listen to someone who lacks the class, grace, and tact, that she should be grateful that I was blessed enough to have been raised correctly by wonderful parents. Otherwise, I would have no compunctions on beating the ugly straight out of her mouth. The absolute ugly she considered a face, as well as the rest of her trashy ass all the way back to Mississippi, where she slithered from. I told her that I had already had permission to leave from the owner, but I would be calling him to quit because I wouldn't work with such an uncouth any longer. Clocked out. Called the owner a few days later that I was sorry, but I quit. A month later, he called multiple times trying to get me back, but he hadn't fired her because she was ducking with his brother. Ended up with a much better paying job, but yeah, that was the rage quit and almost assault charges. Story 46. One boss quit and they wanted me to run the department as the manager, but keep me at assistant pay too. They hired a new manager behind my back for the job that had been promising me for months and wanted me to train her, still at assistant pay level. 3 new manager went on vacation and I was supposed to run the department alone again. I waited till the new manager was out of town and quit. Story 47. I once rage quit as a server and walked home and then walked back in 20 minutes later. I lived close. And no one realized I'd quit, so I put in my 2 weeks and finished it out. My partner, on the other hand, rage quit as a manager and closed the restaurant and sent everyone home. Owner didn't even know the joint was closed until 2 days later. Most employees there never showed up anyways, so if any of them did show up and realize it was closed, they just went home. Story 48. Worked in a popular bakery chain in the United Kingdom. I can't remember what irked me so much about my manager, but she was a massive git. I'd been bottling it up for months at this point, but toward the end, I only really remember the snide remarks she used to make. What ended up being my final shift was a 5 a.m. start, so I'm on my motorbike at 4:30 a.m. in the winter cold to go and work for a person who seemed to get off making my life miserable. It's amazing what a person will do for money. She'd especially pissed me off the previous day, and I wasn't in the mood for her crap today, let alone at that time in the morning. I told myself en route I was going to quit the moment she started being a banana. It was a sort of challenge for her in a way. Manager, good morning, as she passes through me. Silence. I could have mumbled it back for all she knew, and she wouldn't have heard at the pace she was going. Given the lead up to this point, she definitely knew that I had chosen not to reply and decided to double down. Manager, 5 minutes later. I don't know if you know this, but it's common courtesy to reply to someone when they greet you in the morning. Pretty damn smugly. Me. Good morning, manager, thank you. I've got so many things to prepare for open at this point, and there's only 2 of us on shift. She's given me a mammoth list of things to do and is leisurely making sandwiches in the other room. Hers is a fair old job, but not something that needs to be completed before open. We've got regular tradesmen coming in and can predict almost exactly what they all want to order. The task of preparing everything for the rush falls to me. This is ingredients, hot drinks, getting stuff in the oven, cleaning, etc. She should have come in to help out, as there's only 20 minutes to get it all done. I've had it at this point. I go into the other room and she's singing to herself. Me. Name, hey, so Manager. You'll have to wait. I've not got time this morning. Me. No, I won't, because I'm leaving. Manager. You can't leave. We've got to open up soon and you've not finished. I can't remember my exit speech very well, so here's the gist. Me. That's your problem. You've been crap to me and you know it. You couldn't go 10 minutes without being a banana, and unfortunately for you, that means I'm gone before we've even opened. Manager. You can't just leave. Me. Yeah, I can. I grab my things. She rushes into for while juggling her phone. Me. Should maybe think about how you treat people. Second best thing about it, first was seeing her face when the reality hit her. Was that because I'd breached contract by quitting without giving prior notice? They were probably within their rights to revoke my salary. The pay slip I received the following month accounted for the few days I had worked that month including the day I quit. Story 49. I started training a guy, machinist, and he told me his starting wage was $27 per hour. He had a few years' experience, but had been out of the industry for a while. After training, the guy would constantly come to me to fix his problems and have really dumb questions every day. So I asked my boss for a raise since this guy was at $27. I was at $22 and he told me he could find someone to do my job for $16, so I said, okay, then let's do that, handed him my badge, and walked out after 15 years. Story 50. I was working at home care for $10 an hour, and I had clients all over the city. My car wouldn't start one day. It was minus 40 degrees or so, and I called and told them I couldn't get to work. I was told to take the bus. I didn't have a winter jacket. I lived in a single-wide trailer, barely making ends meet, and I layered sweatshirts in order to stay warm enough in my car and between my car to a client house. But it wasn't nearly warm enough to take the bus in. I swallowed my pride and told the scheduler that I didn't have a winter coat and I wasn't able to do that. She told me that she thought I just wanted the day off in a really snarky and dismissive tone. It made me cry. I couldn't afford to miss work. I told her okay, hung up, and wrote my resignation letter. I expected compassion from somebody who worked in nursing and instead was mortified. I ended up at a much better job for more pay and a lot more kindness. Story 51. I stuck around even as they dumped toxic crap down the drain untreated. I even stuck around after they asked me, but really threatened, to make a highly toxic and flammable solution. I finally left when one of the production guys complained I was on the computer too much. I was entering data from my lab work earlier in the day. When I asked why this guy spent more time spying on me than working, I was told I had to work harder. I quit 2 weeks later. Story 52. My dad was in the intensive care unit, and I got put on a performance plan since I missed 3 days in a row. Best thing I ever did was rage quit that job with nothing lined up. Got a job a few months later, and I'm extremely happy there. Story 53. Used to be a vet tech. I was already past my last straw, or so I thought. My 2 weeks was already submitted. I was maybe 3 days into that 2 weeks. Dentist table was just $1, and the giant X-ray thing hanging from the ceiling was nudged out into the way. I was rushing around for an emergency and ran smack dab into that heavy steel equipment. Left a nasty bruise on my head. Gave out a loud damn, and that was that. I quit on the spot. I was already done after a doctor had tried to wave me away when a dog who literally couldn't breathe came in. Dog passed away, but that was the reason for the 2 weeks. Story 54. I was working for a friend out of college doing it-based consulting work. I got crazy sick and was out of action for a week. Told friend, gave him doc to prove I wasn't making crap up, etc. Because I was sick for a week, we had to push back an entirely arbitrary deadline for a program I was making for our joint client. Client was perfectly fine with it and didn't actually end up using it for months later. My friend said, because you missed the deadline. I'm not paying you for any of the hours you put into that work. He billed client and just kept the cash for himself. He then assumed I would just keep working like nothing happened. I instantly quit. Sent apology email to client about how I would no longer be able to service them and wish them the best. I should have reported friend to the state, but I was still recovering, too confused, and had to focus on finding new employment. That was 20 years ago and was the first and only time I ever quit a job on the spot. Story 55. Had one of those bosses where, as soon as he enters the room, the entire energy of the building drops. You'd hear him screaming at people daily in his office. One day I got yelled at for not checking with him before writing a press release. So I checked with him the next day, and he yelled at me for not thinking for myself. Realized he was just a power-tripping banana head, handed in my resignation at HR department within an hour. Story 56. I was 16 working at a gas station. Owner went on a hunting trip. His wife came in and opened the safe, took money, left. I was accused of stealing it. I pointed out I didn't have the combination, and the receipts for the day I worked that weekend didn't add up to what was gone. He called the cops, admitted to them that only he and his wife had the combination. He was idiot. Story 57. Office Max. I worked in a fairly rural location. Seems like it wouldn't be too difficult of a job if there aren't a lot of customers, right? No. Instead of having a full staff of one stalker, puller, one cashier, one floor salesperson, and one impress, print studio, employee, they made one person do all that. And that person was usually me. I started getting so pissed off that the schedule usually was just me and another manager named Casey, who did duck all besides lounge in the back office and play video games. And when corporate showed up for a random walkthrough and found that barely anything was stocked, there was a line at the print studio and ink station plus a line to be checked out at the front. I told them, "Go see for yourself. He's probably playing Halo back there." They did. He started yelling, blamed me for not having anything done. Corporate pulled me aside and asked if the store would benefit from additional employees. Yes, thank you. Then maybe we could actually get stuff done. No problem. Thanks for your hard work. We'll send an employee from another store to work here while we hire and train adequate staff. Finally, things were turning around. The first day the employee from another store showed up to work, Casey sent her home, said I had no problem handling it, when really he just didn't want anyone ratting him out for lounging all day. This was 7:45 a.m. on a Saturday, mind you. Store was about to open. Big sale. Nothing stocked. People waiting at the door to go look at items that hadn't even been put out on the floor yet, let alone pulled from packing. I told Casey, "Hey, I'm going to run out and smoke real quick." "Well, hurry up. Corporate's coming at noon and this store better be stocked and ready or it's your ass." I politely walked back towards Casey's direction, took off my lanyard and badge, slid it across the counter. "You can handle it, champ." I quit. I'd get to stocking if I were you, and I walked out of the store. I called my grandpa and we met for breakfast, while Casey left 40-something missed calls and voicemails. Deleted them without listening. Story 58. I worked at a local BBQ chain for 8 years. They had 4 locations across town. I was sent out to run the lowest performing one about 6 years in. The owners were incredibly absent. I'd go months without hearing from or seeing them. We were always short-staffed in favor of the busier locations, as anyone decent who got hired was immediately transferred to a different store. Towards the end of my tenure there, I was doing the following roles. Manager, BBQ pitmaster. The last 7 months, I was the only manager there every day. I did all of the prep cooking. We didn't have a dishwasher for 9 months, so I was also the only one washing dishes. I was pulling 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. But the company had been good to me when I was going through a rough spat in life about 7 years earlier, so they had my loyalty. The final straw came when we had a health inspection and got an 86. For those not familiar with the restaurant industry, anything below a 95 is pretty bad. 80s are very bad. Of those 14-point deductions, 10 of them were for facilities issues I'd been begging the owner to fix. We had mold growing out of the walls in the women's bathroom. The dishroom sink was leaking. Our walk-in cooler floor was chipped. Many of the baseboards were crumbling. There was a straight-up hole in the wall in the lobby. Men's bathroom didn't have hot water. We had a whole urinal taped off and blocked off as the plumbing was duct. Owner's response? They blamed me for the 4 points that I was responsible for, which were all easily fixable minor crap. Things on the serving line not being labeled, improper ppm concentrations on our sanitizer solution, etc. Anyways, by this point, I had nearly had enough and things came to a head when one of the managers at another location started mocking us on 7 shifts, a scheduling app with a message board. I angrily replied and made a comment about how the owners don't give a duck. Why should I? Almost immediately, one of the owners called me and started berating me and got very personal about it. At which point, I handed my keys to the most senior cook there, walked to the bar and grabbed a handle of Jameson and went home. Story 59. All of us graduate student assistants were forced to come to campus to work in person, sharing cramped cubicle spaces, while attending Zoom meetings where 100% of the full-time staff were working from home. To add insult to injury, we had just spent an entire summer all working remotely, and us grad assistants had proved our ability to complete our work to a high quality remotely. Nobody was even there on campus to supervise us or offer assistance without jumping on a call anyways. It was such bullcrap, and I quit halfway through the year. Story 60. Call center. Talking to people dumber than NPCs for 8 hours every day. Being required to work 1 weekend day. Poor leadership. Crafty pay. Never being allowed to move departments. Being told, unless someone dies, chances of being promoted are slim to none. It took a huge toll on my mental health. So I left same day, no notice, and no regrets. They ended up firing everyone a few months later and outsourcing to the Philippines so they can cut down pay costs. Story 61. Guy I worked for years ago wasn't abusive, but he paid more than double what anyone else would have been paying me considering my lack of qualifications for the job. His wife worked in the office as well, and he was just as much of a to her as he was anyone else. One day, though, it went too far, and he really laid into her. I was in the back office tearing down a PC, and I heard the angry voice. Came out and he was screaming in her damn face. So I pulled him away from her and he turned on me. And that was when the angry demon inside me took over. Kicked his damn teeth in. Quit on spot. Next thing I know, cops at the door, and I'm being charged with assault. And of course, his wife has backed up his version of events. 2 things happened that day. I learned never to take crap from a boss because it builds up and up until you lost your crap. And never get involved in a domestic. She won't thank you and will instead duck you over. Story 62. They weren't going to give me a summer position after my contract was up, so I would be out of work in less than 2 weeks. Then I got the call and application and interview I did months ago went well. Oh, and training starts in 2 days. I won't say where I worked, but the job was physically and mentally draining. I often felt sick to my stomach, heading and dreading all the different challenges headed my way. Received a bad performance review and told I was out of a job in a few weeks. While simmering outside of the building, wondering what to do, I got the call I was offered a position at a different company. I didn't even let the person finish to tell me the hours. Pay. I didn't give a damn. I was available for hire immediately and said training being in 2 days was perfectly fine. I then turned on my heel back inside, took off my work shirt, and gave it back to the one who gave me my review, told her I quit. The supervisor asked who would cover my shifts, and I said that's not my job. So not my problem since they were letting me go anyways. I was pissed at the time I quit, but calmed down and felt elated on the drive home. Story 63. I was a server at a steakhouse. My coworkers and I were a bunch of goofballs that loved messing with each other, and our boss was a super laid-back guy, which made what happened all the more surprising. I was working the cocktail area, split between me and another server. One of her tables was a two-top with a middle-aged guy who was drunk off of his ass. He'd had 8 Manhattans already, so he grabs my arm as I walk by and starts screaming at me about how his steak wasn't done well enough, and he'd better get another Manhattan, free. He dug his fingers into my arm so hard it hurt and left marks. I looked all over for the other server, but couldn't find her. Looked for the manager, couldn't find him, so I took the steak back and had them cook it more, and gave him 1 more Manhattan. So I had the cooks turn his filet into a charcoal briquette. I finally find the other server. She's in the walk-in crying and has bruises on her arm from this guy. I tell her I'll handle it, so I give the dude his heresy of a steak, and it's somehow still not well done enough. He stands up, grabs me, and starts screaming at me while making stabbing motions towards my face with a steak knife. I was terrified. The manager finally showed up. Drunk dude starts yelling about bad food and bad service, and the manager says, "I'm so sorry, your whole meal is on me, and I'll get you a few more drinks, and these 2 servers will be disciplined." I thought he didn't know about everything, but he did know and had known, and let both me and the other server be assaulted. And he actually did yell at me in front of the other customers. As he yelled at me, I realized that my boss didn't care if I got stabbed in the goddamn face. So I took my apron off right there in the cocktail area in front of everyone and told him to go duck himself. Story 64. It was my boss. Her boss had just left the company, and he was an extremely influential, longtime vice president. After he left, the entire political dynamic of the office changed. My boss became an absolutely menace to work with. Cutthroat, nasty, overly demanding, with no ability to actually influence other departments. She took this out on her direct reports. One day she called me ranting about some report, and I said, okay, I'll look into it. At this time, I had just left the doctor's office. I walked to my car and just sit there for a while, realizing that she knew that I was not currently in office and why I was at the doctor, and I lost it. I drove straight home, grabbed my laptop, badge, other company items, then went straight to the office. Looked at the security woman at the front desk and handed all of my stuff in and said I was resigning. Naturally, the security woman was confused as all hell. At this point, I told her to have a great day, texted my boss and one other person on the team and said I had resigned and left my items with security. It was later that I found out that my boss then went around the company telling everyone I had mental health problems that I had to address, which is why I left so abruptly. Absolutely insane woman. Story 65. The foreman trying to throw me under the bus for a $4 million screw-up in product run that was his fault. And this plus a lot of other bullcrap. As the owner of the store stood there calling me every name under the sun, threatening me with lawsuits and such bullcrap. I told him to shut up before I came over top of the desk and made him. That stunned him and everyone in the office, as I was normally a quiet guy. I then simply said I quit and walked out. I then called Indiana Occupational Safety and Health Act a bigger pain than Fed Occupational Safety and Health Act that day, and told them I wanted to report some major issues. Knew one of the higher-ups, and the following day, I and Occupational Safety and Health Act walked into the factory. The owner went white, then tried to say I wasn't allowed on the property. That didn't fly with Occupational Safety and Health Act. All total, that trip cost the company $15 million in violations, and 2 weeks closed just to fix half of the stuff to let them open the doors again. Story 66? I wouldn't say I rage quit, but I left one afternoon and never went back except to grab a few personal belongings. It was my 5th year teaching, 2nd year in 5th grade, and I had a horrible principal. The kind of admin where 2 kids got in a fist fight in class. I got in trouble for it, and they were back in the room within 15 minutes. He also called me into his office after contract hours one afternoon to tell me what a horrible teacher I was and that I will never get another job in his district. The kids grew up in a rough neighborhood in Central California. One boy's mom left him on a family friend's doorstep. Another kid's dad was a notorious gang member in the area, and yet another kid was born to young mother. Needless to say, their trauma and home lives were reflected in their behavior at school. I'd been having panic attacks every morning on my way to work, pinching my arm while trying to teach and leaving bruises on myself to stay sane. crying every day on my way home, etc. Finally, one evening, I just broke down sobbing and told my partner that I couldn't go back, or I would become one of those teachers you see in the news who loses it and gets fired. Went to the doctor that night. He put me on stress leave, and that was that. I almost quit teaching that year, but I decided to give it one more try. I've been at my current school for 5 years. I'm the grade level lead for 3 grade levels. I mentor new teachers, run the photography club for the older kids, and more. Most importantly, admin supports the teachers and actually gives out consequences to students. Not that they need to give out consequences often, because the kids are great. In fact, one of my students asked me the other day why we don't have fights at our school. Story 67. Neighbor owned a distribution business for snack cakes and tortillas, chips. He paid me and one other person under the table to follow behind him on deliveries and pull, rotate, and face product. We would start around 4 a.m. at one grocery store and end around 7 or 8 a.m. after the fourth and final grocery store. He ended up selling the business to some 22-year-old dude who agreed to keep me on, under the table. The person I did the job with ended up leaving, so it was just me to take care of all that stock. Naturally, the facing wouldn't be done as quickly, so he would constantly call me. Such and such store's manager would wonder why the stock was still shrink-wrapped and sitting in the back, so he'd call me to chew me out. Now, original owner would at least remove the plastic when he left the pallets for us, then text to let us know where he left it. New guy would only leave me a scavenger hunt each time, so that would set me back even farther. One day, I had a flat tire to change between stores 3 and 4. I texted new boss that I'd be a lot later on this route, but would be along after changing out my tire. He immediately called to berate me, never asked if I was all right, needed help, just wanted to know when I'd get the last pallet finished. I let him know I'd get to it when I got to it, and he replied by hanging up on me. I took my sweet-ass time changing that flat, and then instead of heading to the 4th store, I hopped on the highway home, blocked homie's number, and left him to figure out how to move the product on his own. Story 68. I worked at a dying mall store during seasonal time with hope to go full after. Supervisor was just a lazy git, but I can get past that easy enough, so it's fine. There's a bunch of buildup for the holiday. They're more from corporate to revamp the store. Turns. Out just burning money. And then a big coupon event that weekend. I show up ready and get put in a new department to begin with. It's coupon day and everyone called off. Other supervisor can't answer basic questions about his department or the coupons. Cool. So I figured I'm just a cashier for the day and stay in my corner. An hour in and just explaining these coupons nonstop, and I finally get the customer who can't make brain go. 30 minutes explaining coupons, 30 ringing her up different ways to show how it works and the different totals. She had a coupon book and wanted to use certain coupons that couldn't be combined. It basically amounts to what is less than $20 difference after saving over $70 on about $150 total. I finally get done, give her the stuff, wish her a good day, and greet the next customer. She just stands there, sighs, and says, "I just think you're wrong," and then doesn't move, just looks at me. Without thinking, I say okay as I type in my numbers and clock out on the register. I take off my name tag and look her in the eye and say, "Well, I'm not. You're damn wrong. Good luck finding an available employee to fix it." I was only cashier on 2nd floor and 1st floor lines were very long, and walked out. As I take the escalator down, I can see her still just standing there with her mouth open, but still clueless. Like I was going to come back to the counter or something. I'm not sure. They called me next day to come back, but I just decided to enjoy the holidays with my family and found another retail job shortly after. That store closed about 2 months later. Story 69. The workshop supervisor started offloading more and more of his paperwork and responsibilities on me. It started out just helping him with quality assurance, control of the production line I was involved in, like holding the other end of the measuring tape sort of thing. Then it crept over to other production lines, and then it was the whole workshop. Suddenly, I had my own cabinet full of binders with paperwork and was doing it all by myself, and having to sign off on quality control reports for which I am responsible for everyone in the workshop if something faulty goes out with my name on it. This is while being 19 years old and also expected to still be part of the production. So basically, doing 2 jobs. The straw was when my coworkers started coming to me with questions and concerns regarding productions I was literally not even involved in any way, shape, or form. Because he had no damn clue what was going on the floor, because he had offloaded all floor responsibilities on me, and had started redirecting people my way. I was on the brink of a burnout at this point, so I didn't even bother quitting properly. Just decided to turn off my phone and never show up again and leave him high and dry to sort that crap. Still feel a bit bad about it. Not for his sake, but for the company we worked for. I should have given them a chance to sort that out, or at least given them a notice of my departure, but I was so done in both body and soul. I just didn't have it in me. Story 70. I was told to move a bunk of floor joist to the back of a building that was being framed up. It was my first day on the job, so Okay, I'll move these 20-foot-long frozen-ass 100-pounds boards across this muddy, uneven terrain because I'm just humping lumber. The boss yells down at me and says, "You isn't no damn Mexican. Put that tool belt back on." Gave him the finger, grabbed my pack, and got in my car. I drove down a few streets and got hired for more money, and the whole crew got high. Story 71? I usually left the jobs I left because I didn't feel like I was being treated even remotely fairly. A lot of times I was like some sort of clown people were trying to make look bad. That's always extra frustrating to me because I really just want a low-drama, simple job with limited coworker interaction that I leave behind when I clock out and go home. Everyone always seemed to want to play power games all the time, though. Like, I just wanted to do what I was told and not cause trouble. But I guess people needed to boost their egos by degrading me whenever they got the chance. I mean, I signed up for a custodian job so that I could work on my own without much drama. The company got me ridiculous industrial equipment for a small cleaning job. It was completely unnecessary for such an application and wound up slowing me down tremendously. Then they didn't supply me soap to do the job with. I got tired of buying my own soap and hoping to be reimbursed. So I just went back to my old job at the plant. Funny thing, when I went back to the floor, my replacement got a closet full of soap. I figure if they're going to work against me so that I can't do the job effectively, they don't want me working. I suppose I'm okay with it. You know, other than not being able to put a roof over my head now. Story 72. Worked at Pizza Hut. Had a throat infection and cold, barely able to stand. Took a day off work with a doctor's note and came in the next day. The manager got stuck into me about how I let the team down and how we were a family. I handed her the doctor's note, flipped her the bird, and walked out. Story 73. I rage quit Kirby vacuum sales after 2 days when I realized they were suckering poor people into buying $1,000 vacuums, 1990 years dollars, with the promise of a credit card to cover the vacuum. On day 2, I asked the boss when we'd go to a wealthier neighborhood and he laughed and confessed proudly, rich white people would never be stupid enough to buy a $1,000 vacuum. He laughingly told me nearly every customer ended up defaulting on the credit card payments. Then Kirby took the vacuum back, and these people's credit was ducked worse than before. About a year later, in a different city, I stupidly answered an ad for sales, and after I arrived, immediately realized I was at a Kirby hiring event. I explained to every applicant how it was a scam, how they would never make the promised salary, etc., etc. They got up one by one and left before the presentation began. Kirby rep was pissed and threatened abuse, but I was in my early 20s and in fine shape. He was not. I invited him to take his best shot, and he raged like a baby but didn't try to start anything. I told him I'd be back for the next hiring drive, but I didn't really plan to follow up. Story 74. I was opening dishwasher. I found a small box of weed in the dish room from closing shift. I was going to turn it in to my boss's boss. I didn't trust my boss. Boss's boss was in a building across the road. He yelled at me and cornered me in the dish room after closing the door that is never closed. I felt very unsafe. I told the cook I wouldn't be in the next day, so she would be prepared. He called next day, and I didn't answer. Boss's boss called, and I answered and told him the events. He believed me over him, and I got hired back with a raise in a different building. And they did some investigating, and he was fired on the spot and had days to leave the property as he lived next door to the kitchen in a building owned by the company. I worked for the company for 8 more years. That dramatic firing was often talked about. Story 75. I worked at Merck for 13 years and had my fair share of crap jobs. Eventually, I ended up in a job that I didn't apply for and didn't want. Group that I did apply to dissolved, and I was put in a close enough replacement. And my onboarding was a damn joke. Minimal training, no ASOP reading list, no job description of what I should be working on. I was placed with someone who was supposed to train me, but he basically did the work and didn't describe anything to me, and I was supposed to learn. Eventually, I had a "you suck" email because I didn't talk enough during meetings, didn't volunteer for work, and I missed an important presentation that I was expected to speak at because the boss never forwarded me the meeting invite or put me on the mailing list. After defending myself for 30 minutes and having to sign a paper that I understood the meeting, I logged off and the stress caused me to relapse into the eating disorder that took me 11 years to break. That was 3 years ago and I'm still trying to find my way back to recovery. Damn you, Chris. Story 76. New boss named Mo at college sandwich shop job. Mo didn't know job or brand and needed his staff to teach him, but was mean, so mass exodus. I was the only one who knew how to make all the sandwiches. Busy Saturday, line out the door. I'm trying to show new guy how to make sandwiches. Mo is taking orders and keeps yelling at me. Mo, I'm doing the best I can. If you raise your voice at me one more time, I'm leaving. Mo yelled at me again and I left. He chased me into the parking lot and ran after my car with a fist in the air. But I told Mo I wasn't going to be spoken to like that. I don't think Mo was used to teenage girls standing up to him and definitely did not expect me to leave him high and dry. Story 77. I was washing dishes at a Denny's for a while to make some extra money. One person there was trying to instigate stuff between me and other people, and I could tell what was going on. One manager got on that guy's side and started giving me crap all the time. I had it when one night I came in on my day off to cover call-out. I'm washing dishes and the manager pokes his head in the back and tells me to work faster because we are swamped and dishes running low. Literally cannot work faster. I got there and there was tons of dishes already dirty, so I was playing catch-up all night. Says something to me several more times about needing to do more work. Manager making it seem like I was lazy and needed to actually work was the last straw for me. I yelled out, "Clean dishes" on the way, at the busiest point of the night after actually barely doing anything for a while, so that there were 0 clean dishes on the back, and snuck out the back door and hauled ass laughing like a hyena on my happy way home. Do not treat important people on your team like crap. Story 78. My second job ever worked was as a ski patrol at a resort in Tahoe. Our supervisor was a 40-years-old-something gal who was an afternoon wino. She came into the patrol shack one afternoon to brief us on a hill sweep after closing and was already on one. She glared at us all, guys and girls, and screamed, "You all need to stop eye-raping me." She then went on about going to HR department on all of us. We all walked and went to the parking lot. 4 of us shared a cabin where we went after Miss Crap for brains through her little attention fit. A sheriff showed up at our door and begged us to do a hill sweep as 2 snowboarders were missing. We went back and searched the mountain until 10 p.m. or so, only to find out those missing snowboarders ditched their ride and took a bus to a local bar. We went to the hill manager's office the next morning and told him what happened and that we weren't interested in working with such a dangerous, imbalanced psycho. He offered us all a 75-cent raise and promoted a senior patrol to her former job. The wino was transferred to food services. A month later, she was terminated for pulling the same BS on the food workers and threatening a lawsuit. Nobody saw her again after that. Story 79. Spent a year working for a company, weekends on call, staying after to help out. You get the idea. An apprentice showed up who was a real duck-up, but was a good artist and had a father who was a supper. Things started to pile up. This kid turns out as a journeyman, and the next Monday is moved up to a foreman. He has no idea how to do what we are doing, and as stuff keeps piling up, he decides to start throwing material away. I get called to the office and have to explain what was going on, but I didn't throw him under the bus. Fast forward 2 weeks. This little git has started talking crap about me behind my back. Now I am fuming because now the super thinks it's my doing. The PM, supper, owner, and GF along with Lil Foreman come walking up to me and start telling me what a failure I have become and how I have let the company down. Bet they didn't think I would get right in their face. They say, never burn a bridge, but I dumped gas on that muff. Then threw books of matches. I made sure to let Il Foreman know that an ass whooping was headed his way. The best part was, I took 5 other guys with me. Story 80. On my first night off from a group home in over a year, I had a client's family call screaming about something the staff on shift had done. I was in the middle of a family get-together with my mom, who lives 23 hours away. I was the house manager for 5 houses at the time, but I had specifically told everyone I was unavailable and made sure they had the actual on-call staff contact info. Then the manager called and berated me for not handling the situation and asked me to please come in. When I said no, she said she would be calling the next day to schedule a meeting with me. On my way home that night, it took real concentrated effort to stop myself from running my car into a tree. I knew I couldn't go in the next day. I texted both the manager and my direct supervisor that I quit. Someone would need to show up to cover ratios at the home the next morning and train the new hire. They had the nerve to ask if I needed help with the training and offered to pull that staff, so I could have an easy morning. Nobody showed up the next day and the trainee called me. I have no idea how I made it as long as I did at that job. Story 81. Had my hours cut from 40 hours per week to 8 hours per week, despite being classified and signed on as full-time. Despite being in a union, I was told there was nothing that could be done. I walked out and never looked back. Story 82. My first job was at the Decay Lounge. Overall, a chill job, and I was there for a while saving up summer money to pay my dad back for hitting my buddy's car. The manager one day asked me to scrub the inside of the metal hood thing that hangs above the fryers. Gave me a small step stool that I had to reach really high to actually reach the ceiling on slippery, greasy floors and wouldn't turn off the fryers while I did it. It felt like it was a million degrees up there as I dangled over the fryers. Didn't say anything, just walked out and never came back. Story 83. Had a part-time job while I was in college. I was probably the best employee. No drama, all good, but I needed to book off a bit of time for a project for class. Not a lot. Just couldn't work during a specific week. Normally, I'd get 4 shifts of 4 hours each. Boss said no, so I reigned. The boss had a surprised Pikachu face. Story 84. My store got bought out by people who did asterisk. Not asterisk know what they were doing. We were a proper fast food place, and their only experience was owning a Subway. They tried to run it like a Subway. At this point, I had been there for years. Was the manager. Job sucked, but it paid my bills, and I loved the store owner. Well, the new a-holes come in, got like 4 days of training at a corporate store, and then proceeded to tell me I was going my job wrong. was a burden on the payroll, all while cutting my hours and then complaining that they weren't fully staffed. I was supposed to train their family members, who did not speak English, by the way. Like, how am I supposed to train with a language barrier so they could be fully staffed? Eventually, one day we got really busy. I had asked one of them if he could grab a backup for me while I was helping some customers. He just stared at me and smiled and walked into the office. I had to go to the bathroom about 15 minutes later and decided I was just leaving. Texted them from a parking lot right down the road and told them I wasn't coming back. Blocked them right after. Story 85. I was a manger for the third largest Domino's franchisee in the world. Rick Flory, Domino's employee number 1. My store was a premier store, meaning that when new products came out, my store was the first to get them. Domino's had just rolled out sub sandwiches. Tom Monahan and the bigwigs from Ann Arbor were coming to Phoenix to tour the stores. My area supervisor wanted everything to be perfect. My crew and I all stayed all night making that store spotless, including painting. The store looked new. It was immaculate. I probably had 2 hours of sleep, showed up early to meet Richard, supervisor. I was super tired and made an offhand comment about how hard we worked. Richard said, "If you can't handle this job, we can find someone who can." I took my keys off of my belt, threw them on the counter, told him to go duck himself, and walked out. Story 86. There's been a few. The owner wouldn't close the food area properly, and I was tired of opening after her and having to clean before opening. So I quit right before I was supposed to open the shop, and I worked alone. The owners told me that my crew was replaceable, so we forced them, via a walkout, to replace us immediately. My supervisor was such a brat and a bully, and I hated looking at her face, so after listening to her get about everything for the millionth time, I just bounced halfway through my shift. My privileges were suddenly revoked without reason, and it was the cherry on top of the bullcrap they pulled. So I sent a very honest and somewhat mean email to HR department, easily the worst employee, and the crappiest executive director I'd ever worked with about how they make that place so horrible and never went back. I was tired of listening to my uneducated, small-minded coworker use disability slurs and watching her do a crap job. We were a 2-person team, so I just left. I'm sure there's more. Apparently, it's my favorite way to quit. Story 87. Told me if I went to the bathroom during shift, he would count it as a break. I told him that's illegal, and he argued. I told the other staff what he told me. He found out and emailed me saying he would take me to court for defamation if I kept talking to the other staff. Walked out mid-shift next day. Damn that. Story 88. During pandemic, the small company I worked for started posting their month-to-month record profits on the bulletin board. They went from a $4 million per month company to a $15 million per month company. They then had the balls to tell all of us that there wasn't enough in the bank to give any of us a raise for almost 2 years. I used a week of vacation to attend the orientation for a new job. At the end of that week, I left orientation and drove to my old job. Walked in, told her department I quit. The best part is that her department was highly incompetent, and I ended up getting my week of vacation payout twice. Story 89. I was 16 years old, working at McPoop, and the manager yelled at me for putting 7 blueberries into a fruit and yogurt parfait instead of 6. She then ate it, jokingly claiming that it wasn't as ordered. I was working Saturday and Sunday from 4:30 a.m. until 1 p.m. every weekend. My lunch had to be scheduled at 5-ish because of breakfast, brunch, and lunch rush. I made $6 an hour. The only night shift I was ever scheduled was New Year's Eve, and I was there until midnight, and I was so upset. Why the heck did we close at midnight on New Year's Eve? I called in my next shift and then showed up on payday, uniform in hand. They asked why I quit, and I was so surprised they weren't yelling at me that I just said, "I hate Crystal, and she ate a parfait." Story 90. I had to take an unpaid low to go down to the States where my mom was spending the winter and help her after a major surgery. The entire time I was off, I was being harassed by coworkers and my boss about stuff that was work-related. The weekend I came back home. I went into the office, grabbed all of my personal belongings, and on Monday morning I walked straight into the HR office and waited for my boss to show up. He was 1.5 hours late that day, so I just gave my immediate notice to the HR person, who was a very close friend and someone I still keep in touch with 13 years later, who simply said, "I don't blame you." Story 91. I was, I think, 20 years old at the time, and I was the oldest member of staff. I was a cook. The night before, apparently, one of our waitresses, who would do the cleanup of the last few bits and pieces, pulled the plug of the dishwasher and left it on the floor of same, but forgot to turn the machine off. Next morning, boss, owner, came in and had a full meltdown at her. He reduced her to tears, and I actually just couldn't take it. I sent her to get the bread and spent the time to try and explain to him that having temper tantrums at his staff affected everyone, and could he please try to be more reasonable? In retrospect, possibly the wrong choice of words. However, he suggested that if that was how I felt, there was the door. I took the invitation. Story 92. I was being bullied relentlessly by, I kid you not, the HR manager. She's a 13 years old mean girl in an alcoholic, perimenopausal, divorcee's brick-shaped body. After weeks of her verbal abuse, digital stalking, and presenting me with documents listing my mistakes that I refused to sign, I finally snapped. I said, "It's obvious that you don't want me here, so if you want me gone, pay me." She did. Story 93. I was a software engineer working on a specialized product in a large company, but at a small engineering team in a remote location. The entire time I worked there, roughly 2 years, I had constant conflict with other individuals on the team due to completely different philosophical approaches to problems we had to solve. After 2 years of attempting to get the director of engineering to understand the wrong approaches were being taken in many different situations, they canceled the project. They told us all it would be shut down, but the 3 of us left out of 10. This was 3 years ago. I told them I was done and I left immediately. The manager called me and told me I had an open checkbook to define my paycheck for the next 2 years, and I said no. Was I dumb? Maybe. Have I been in a much better mental state since? Absolutely. Story 94? My kitten passed away, and he said she was just a dumb animal and I should stop crying. I was crying because I just got the text. After a week of this fat damn douche telling me men were better than women and that he could do anything mechanically better than me because he didn't have a pussy. I'm a mechanic, he pays the dealership for his oil changes, and telling my 110 feet self to get in better shape after I moved an entire room of tires, I was done. I flipped him off and told him I hoped he had a heart attack and no one could get him onto a stretcher. I went from being one of their best to being banned from pick and pull. Story 95? I got written up for being late for a shift. Only problem, that same manager called me on my day off, asking if I could cover a shift that started in 2 hours as nobody else could do it. I said, "Yeah, but I'm not sure if I can get there on time." I showed up 2 hours and 15 minutes later. She wrote me up at the end of the shift for being late. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. She said, "No, really. You need to be on time even if you're covering for someone else." I flipped out. She told me I was being unprofessional, so I said, "Oh yeah, Ronnie, I'm being unprofessional, even if that's true. I'll be professional again tomorrow. But tomorrow, you'll still be a raging see you next Tuesday." And I walked out. I said good luck to the new guy who had just started, and I never looked back. Restaurant life, it blows. Story 96. In back-to-back weeks, my kid got massively sick and wound up in the hospital. I was working, not my choice, as a primary manager of a restaurant over an hour away. When I called the director and let him know the other manager was coming in to let me leave, he told me that it sounds like a bunch of nonsense drama to me. Get behind the line and do your job. I still left that day after manager got there. But the only thing that kept a walkout was I liked the staff. The next week, I got sick, went to PCP and was positive for the flu. I called and told the same asshat as above, and he told me if I didn't come in and suck it up, it'd be a no call, no show. I told him then and there he could take that job and shove it directly up his ass. Story 97. I started a job that was a junior position and was promised a whole bunch of things about the work in the interview and starting up. No training guy I worked with literally told me, "I don't have time to teach you this," and just left me to sit there while I wait for him to train me between meetings. When he was free, he was a condescending banana about everything, expecting me to have a deep understanding of the topic when it was literally a junior position advertised with, "Training will be provided." On my first day, the clock hit 4:30 and no one started to leave. I waited to see what was going on and at 4:35 asked, "Just to confirm, we finish at 4:30, right?" "Oh yeah, but there's so much work, so we normally stay back until 5. "Oh right. Yes, and we normally come in every second Saturday too." "Oh, no one told me about doing overtime. What's the rate for it?" "Well, it's just part of the salary. We don't get paid for it." I left after 1 week. Story 98. Taking away my Christmas bonus after they told me I could leave to be with my grandmother at the hospital as she passed. After I left, they called me to inform me since I missed a day I wouldn't qualify for the bonus anymore. Story 99. When I was first hired, they told me if we had one more full-time spot, you would have gotten it. I was trained in my department, and then a few weeks into setup, a brand new store, they asked me to train this other girl. And then she got the full-time position for that department. Then I was asked if I wanted a specific job and made it sound like I was pretty likely to be given the position, and then they gave it to somebody else. The final straw was a woman went away on maternity leave, and while she was gone, our CSMS began training me to be a temporary CSM because one of them was also pregnant, in anticipation of her maternity leave. So I got trained and was beginning to do some CSM stuff when the first woman came back from maternity leave. Then one of the CMSs comes up to me and looked really, I don't know, apprehensive, sorry, and said the manager wants me to train the woman who just came back. I said, nah, I'll just quit. Story 100. After spending over 2 years in what was meant to be a temporary secondment, and being told every 3 months that I was just needed a little longer, I finally demanded to be put back in my original job. I was told they'd put someone else in permanently 2 weeks after I started the secondment. I handed my keys and security badge to my boss and walked out on the spot. Story 101. I worked fast food. I was also doing a student teaching and taking classes. I needed just one day to catch up. I was waking up at 5:30, doing student teaching until 3 o'clock and working 10, usually ending up later because otherwise they would illegally make the children close. I was getting 5 hours of sleep a night. I tried calling out, lied about my car messing up so they would let me, and they sent someone to my house to get me instead of letting me call out. I didn't ask or agree. I just heard someone outside honking, and it was another employee saying they'd been sent to get me. I worked that day and then blocked everyone and never went in again. Story 102. I was being harassed by my supervisor, who was outright trying to get me fired because I stole her work friend. After Christmas, she had me retrieving all the returns from customer service and then properly hanging or folding literally shopping carts full of clothes. I was on probably my 10th full cart in 2 hours when customer service called to say we had 2 more carts. I had a couple more items to process, so I didn't rush up. My supervisor complained I wasn't moving quickly enough. When I walked up to get the carts, she was standing just gabbing with someone. I was just over it. I knew I could get a better job, so I quit in front of my coworkers and customers. I screamed at her that she was in a hole and made my life a living hell. I've worked my way up from a PT sales associate to a store manager, sometimes multiple stores, in only a few years. She's still at the same store, but has been demoted several times. Story 103. I was working a liquor store chain that had a deli. Evidently, this place was busy for lunch, but I was hired to work evenings. Place was slow as duck, literally nothing for me to do. I offered ideas for things I could do and was told, no, be ready for customers. One time we actually had a customer. They wanted a half order of something for their kid. I said sure and sent the order back. The cook laid into me for the half order. That was the last straw. I flipped a coin. Heads and I walk. Tails, I stick it out. It hit tails and I walked anyway. Went to the manger and told them I quit. I said I didn't feel bad about it either because there was nothing for me to do. Story 104. I worked customer-facing tech support for GoDaddy. It was an interesting job. Learned a lot of stuff, but the dip-crap customers making whack-ass websites with stupid ideas always the worst. I had this guy call in and basically was just trying to get me to fix all the crap he broke and was being a total a-hole about it. I was finally just done with it and all my customer service glee was drained. He asked me to do something or another and I said, I'm sorry, that's outside of the scope for tech support. He got all huffy. Let me talk to your supervisor. I paused a bit. No silence. What? Give me your supervisor. No. And I hung up on him. That's as rage as I got. Yes, I did get fired. Story 105. Worked at a gas station chain. It was sold to another chain. All company owned, not franchised. Day of takeover, the new company confirmed with myself and the other manager that they were not selling the site as a franchise. 5 minutes later, 2 men walk in, and when we asked what we could do for them, stated they were going to be the new franchise owners and just wanted to look around. Manager and I handed our keys to the new company rep and walked. We were followed by the guy on shift and went next door for a small farewell party. All but one of the staff joined us, and our area manager from the old company organized for us to get a redundancy from the old company. Don't ask for the legalities. I have no idea other than it had something to do with the condition of sale about retaining staff. I didn't ask because, I got the redundancy money. Story 106. Working at an airport bar. Tips were pooled based on hours worked over the pay period, rather than something sensible like paying out tips to the people that worked the damn shift they were earned on. Anyway, after 2 years of working the busiest nights and missing all of my weekends, only to be paid the same amount as the morning people who bragged about doing schoolwork during their shifts. While I was also in school part-time and struggling to keep up both, and covering for other servers who would always call out, and teaching myself to bartend because so would the damn bartenders. I quit because the manager went on vacation, and the very next day the rest of the night crew just bounced. Couldn't take another shift of 14 four-tops and 11 bars guests, and a giant line from the cash register that would only end up paying me like 30% more than a regular ass day. My therapist says the job traumatized me, and I'm inclined to agree. Story 107. A woman tried to hand me wet money from her bra when I was working at Starbucks. I asked her to please provide an alternative form of payment, as I could not accept that. She proceeded to call me a ducker. My store manager came out and apologized to the customer. Comped her order and gave her a $50 recovery card. I will never be over it, Kelly. Damn you. I worked at Starbucks for years. This was so long ago, and I remember it so fresh, even though I saw red. Story 108. I was working in food service for the prison system, and the management told me that my concerns with the black mold on the roof and with food safety practices. For example, the meat came in giant blocks, and people were thawing it over the course of 6 hours in the proofer, so the outer edge was sitting in the danger zone for most of that time, were not a big deal because they were just inmates. To be clear, I was an employee of a private contracting company that provided food service at the lowest possible bid for the region. Privatization at its finest. Story 109. I was a 21-year-old starring my first salon job. I was 2 months in and pretty much cried on the way home every day because the women there were so mean. One day I went to work with minimal makeup, blush, and mascara only. I consider myself to be a fairly attractive woman, but my manager sent the front desk girl over who to me. Pack up your things for the day. You can come back when you look better. I almost rage quit on the spot, but left and was going to come back the next day and leave no notice. But my dad encouraged me to put in my 2 weeks. I wore tennis shoes to work the next day because I intended to just take my stuff and go, but decided my dad was right in case I needed references. I get to work, and the manager says, either buy new shoes or go home for the day. Then I rage quit. Story 110. Rage quit Pizza Hut. After a couple of short training sessions, I was on my first 10-hour shift on a Friday night. 3 people. After a couple hours, the manager leaves to pick up supplies. Tons of orders coming in, make like 30 pizzas in a few hours. Manager never comes back. Other cook says he's got to deliver some of these pizzas, leaving me alone. There is this order printer that is just going off. Customer comes to pick up pizza. I don't even know how to use the cash register. I was in sweat. Food everywhere. No clue what I'm doing. Give the customer a bunch of pizzas, and I just followed him out the door and left the apron on the counter. No one ever called me or anything. It was like I was never hired. Story 111. When I was driving to work, I thought of how nice it would be to get into a car accident, so I didn't have to go in. That's when I knew I needed to switch jobs. Story 112. I had pandemic and didn't realize it, making me feel extra fatigued and groggy. This was on the first day after vacation. I don't feel too bad about leaving people in the lurch, because my supervisor was so openly scornful towards me over the previous months. Couldn't stand having her mutter about me. Story 113. I put in my notice after I was denied my request to take vacation. For context, I had maxed out on my banked hours, over 160, so I wasn't accruing anymore. I had just finished a massive project that had a significant pucker factor, and my nerves were fried. My company has been bought by its competitor and was in the process of being taken over. I was the last person remaining in the department. Everyone else had quietly left to join another company and didn't tell me. So this left me as the sole person doing all projects, the calculations part, nationally. I had asked for assistance for months and gotten nothing but platitudes from upper management. The end result was that I walked away with my vacation hours in the form of a check. Went to Hawaii right after I deposited it. Felt good. Story 114. Called out. Carried a high-level project emergency on the crap-ass shuttle Wi-Fi, only to be threatened to have my job automated for not suggesting a solution. The office ran on terrorizing people. Just no. Story 115. I got into an argument with my abusive ex-husband during my lunch break. I had a panic attack sitting in my car, so it made me late back from lunch. My supervisor went on and on and on about how much of a burden I am to the team for being late, as if that wasn't caused by understaffing actually. So I told her I'm sorry I'm such a disappointment and hire someone better. I packed my crap and stormed out. She went ahead and lied around that I'd cussed her out, but it was false and nobody who knew me believed her. Story 116. Late teens, fast food job. Always asked me to work late. Called me most days off to cover a shift. The final straw was when a manager called me 8 times on my day off to ask me to take a shift that night. Story 117. Manager would give me instructions, admonish me for following said instructions, and then would deny ever having given said instructions. Multiple instances. Story 118. Not me, but my friend quit our job recently because the boss said she put his raise into the system and never did. He was already pissed at the job, but that was his final straw. Her not putting in his raise into the computer. Story 119. The guy that worked behind me when I was an insurance agent was hired as an accountant. He rarely did the accounting. He mostly just chatted on the phone. I found out he was making nearly double what the rest of us were. When I went and asked the manager why, she said it was because he had a family to support. I told her that the rest of us should all get paid at least as much as he was being paid as we were doing all the work. She declined. I quit on the spot. Story 120. I was working at a call center and got written up for going to the restroom too much. Talking on the phone means drinking water. Drinking water means peeing. My supervisor handed me the write-up. I took another call and then walked out when the call ended. Story 121. The place had to be staffed 24 hours a day. They refused to hire more people and corporate fired our GM without replacing him. It got to the point where the shift expectation went from 8 hours a day for everyone with 3 shifts to 12 hours a day with 2 shifts. I noped out when I was told halfway through my night shift that they would need me to stay for 4 more hours. The job sucked and the management was absent. I looked back on some of my writing from that time a few years later. I really hated that job. Story 122. I can no longer remember the whole story and he's long gone now. But my grandfather, sometime in his 40 years old, once rage quit a job with the line, "Boss guy, I need this job like I need a hole in my head." And he stormed out, never to return. He was always very proud of this. He got another job in his field soon after that, went on to do many great things and retired in comfort. So all's well that ends well. Story 123. I came into a note on my desk that my tea was too aromatic and I had to stop drinking it. It was ginger and peppermint tea I drank because my anxiety was absolutely through the roof from working there. I quit that day. Clearly, there were a lot of much more meaningful straws before that, but that was the final one. It was like the one pleasant thing I could enjoy while that hellscape had just been snatched from me and I couldn't take it anymore.